Welcome to the Reason Roundtable, the weekly libertarian podcast from the magazine that, just like President Joseph Robinette Biden II, doesn't look a day younger than 81. I am Matt Welch, joined by Nick Gillespie, Peter Suderman, and Katherine Mangu-Ward. Happy pre-Thanksgiving, Kang.
Howdy.
Hey, Matt.
Happy Turkey Week.
Yeah. Let's get straight into it. It's not often, honestly, that libertarians feel their pulses quicken a bit after a faraway country's presidential election. But last night was something different going on. Javier Milei, the Argentinian free market economist, self-described anarcho-capitalist, and dog-cloning sex coach, chainsawed his way to an electoral victory so shocking that American news organizations had to invent brand new political categories to describe him, such as the Washington Post's Trump-like libertarian. Milei, the leather-jacketed hair model who campaigned on dollarizing the economy as a way to combat a 140% inflation rate, and also taking a Thor's hammer, there's video, to any number of state institutions, from the central bank to the Ministry of Culture, said in his victory speech, enough of the impoverishing caste model, that's with an E. Today, we once again embrace the model of freedom. Argentina has a future, but this future exists if it is free. As the tremendous Twitter account, Sweet Meteor of Death, tweeted last night, congratulations to Nick Gillespie on becoming the president of Argentina.
Sí.
Libertad! Katherine, Can you describe the out-of-body sensation of reading the phrase, libertarian elected president?
It was something, actually. I was up in New York this week, and I got a chance to meet Antonella Marti at the Atlas Network dinner. And there was, I had the pleasure of meeting in person Antonella Marti, who has written for us about Javier Milei and has, I think, the best take on him, which is basically that he is a cult of personality in the name of liberty. And that is both encouraging and discouraging, right? He seems to be a really weird dude. And I say that as someone who totally buys the connection between Nick and Milei. He just seems like a character. And unfortunately, his running mate does seem to be extremely socially conservative in ways that cross over from, hey, people got different visions of how to live their lives, to maybe the state should enforce those visions. So I am worried about that. But Milei himself, I'm happy to take a little bit of a win. I don't want to invest too much in him because, let's all say it together, all politicians are garbage and they will disappoint you in the end. This will be true of Milei as well.
Peter, the Argentinian economy is a disaster. Government finances and so forth. Can you give a snapshot of the massive challenges that Milei faces on trying to sort of bend a Peronist state to his free will?
Yeah, so like you said, huge inflation. It hit 143%, and people don't like that. I think that explains a lot of his win. I think in many ways it was a vote against the guys who gave us this inflation as much as it was a vote for his sort of populist, anarcho-capitalist, libertarian-styled, sort of political leanings, right? And this was as much a vote against the people who had done this to the economy. And so anything else, anybody who was like, throw those bums out, that guy was going to win. I think the big thing that he has proposed that is worth focusing on here is dollarizing the economy. And what that basically means is we are going to take away the ability of government officials to print more money. You just won't be able to do it anymore because that will be entirely in the U.S. government's hands, because we will be using dollars. And so instead of having a dollar-pegged economy, it will be the U.S. government is better at this, and even if they're not better at it, we're not the ones doing it, and that means that we can't abuse this. And so that seems to me to be his biggest and best and clearest proposal, and that could serve as a path to ending or at least mitigating a bunch of their problems. I will say also there's a bunch of political issues here that I am just catching up on. I am no Argentinian politics expert. However, does look like he doesn't have a coalition in Congress. And he is going to have to work with people who maybe, even if they are not leftists, progressives, sort of folks from who are totally supportive of the previous regime, he's going to have to work with people who may not agree with a bunch of his ideas. And so I would just caution, in addition to the what Katherine says all the time, which is that politicians will disappoint you inevitably. At best, there are going to be compromises here, and this is going to be a hard road politically for him to reform their economic policy and fix that country's economy.
It does seem like this is a little bit of a case. I am always very, very wary of saying this, but it's a little bit of a case of like, can it be worse than where they are now? I mean, for the economy especially.
Oh, it can always get
I know
worse.
It can always get worse,
Yeah.
but like,
Aren't you the person who
I know.
always reminds us
I know.
that hitting bottom is not the path
right, but that's different. I'm not saying
to reform,
can
to like
it get
productive
worse so that it gets better? I am literally in this case just saying like, well, they might as well try something.
I certainly think that it could get worse in the short term, even on a path to getting better. And this is the thing, is that he has proposed what some people have called shock therapy for the economy, which is a radical reduction in spending. And while you absolutely need that in the medium to long term, there's a way to do it right. And I don't know that way. Like, to be clear, I do not have in my head on Monday morning the exact perfect plan for doing this. But but there's a way to do that stuff right, and a way to do that where it's going to be very disruptive and people are going to dislike it and there's going to be a backlash. And so, one thing that I talk about on this podcast a little bit, actually that came up in a recent Nick Gillespie interview, is that implementing government programs is hard. And this is something that we think about as libertarians as evidence for why maybe we should have fewer government programs. But it's also true of reforms. And reform policies that we support, implementing them well and making sure that they work and are successful, that is a very difficult thing to do. And he is an outsider without a lot of experience. There's upsides to that, but there's also going to be some downsides. The learning curve is going to be very steep for him.
Nick, in addition to just giving your general reaction, can you give your sartorial summary of his look?
I like his look,
yeah.
More than anything.
Surprised to
really,
learn that.
that's more important than any. I do wish he would comb his hair back a little bit. I don't like the kind of brush forward.
Mm-hmm.
It's
a
little bit Joyce.
Bay City Rollers.
It's a little bit Joyce DeWitt from Three's Company at various points. So I don't know. I also give it, Katherine touched on Victoria Villarruel's social conservatism. I think there's going to be some friction between them if he keeps talking about pegging the economy. I just get the impression she's going to be a little bit upset by all that talk.
Okay.
Yeah. But one of the most incredible thing in looking at all of this is how badly Argentina has gone in the tank over the past decade or so. In 2013, about 5% of the people were living below the poverty line. It's currently 40%. Peter talked about the 140% annual inflation. I read one summary that said actually in the past couple of months, it's been closer to 300%, and I mean, it beggars the mind to think about that. And, and then you factor in the idea that it could get worse. It has historically in various places, but I like, overall, I think Milei is, it's really fascinating, and also seeing about dollarizing the economy, exactly what that means. If it means not necessarily officially converting anything to dollars or everything to dollars, but allowing dollars to circulate freely. Because right now it's actually very difficult. In some of our coverage by Daniel Raisbeck, as well as Antonella Marti and her co-author, talked about some of this. It's, making it easier may also pull a lot of money that is kind of locked in the gray or black market, because like in many countries with massive inflation and a shitty central bank and a useless currency, a lot of stuff is happening below the surface. But I'm all for it. I just, I worry about the populism bubbling around the edges. But, for God's sake, this is incredibly exciting. This is a guy who is accused of plagiarizing, people like Mises, Hayek, and Rothbard. And that's like pretty good. Like, I mean, we know that politicians not only will disappoint us, but they're all bullshit artists. And it's like, this guy is taken from the best.
At least he's borrowing the very best bullshit.
Yeah.
At least it's not Neil Kinnock. Katherine, there is, you brought up the cult of personality for freedom. Another phrase that gets thrown around describing the guy is libertarian populism. He's very charismatic. He's snarly, especially when he's talking about socialism and the Red Chinese and so forth, and has a little bit too much energy. And his eyes kind of blaze a little bit too much. So a question being, can you...
That's normal, though.
Okay.
That's what you're hoping.
Can you see, can you imagine a sort of libertarian populism taking root here in the U.S. and A?
Sure. I mean, I think the most encouraging part about Milei's election is definitely just the idea that in general, this like word cloud of anarchism resonated with people. Like, I think that's the part of it that's the most exciting. Of course, it's possible that this is the Massey rule, right? It's possible that people are just into the craziest motherfucker in the room because things are bad and they feel bad and so they want change.
I think what Massey said was son of a bitch.
No, I think, well, we'll see. Maybe I'm sorry, Fred Young.
He did.
But the craziest son of a bitch in the room theory has certainly shown itself to have validity here in the United States in the person of Donald Trump. And I actually think the charitable interpretation of that Washington Post phrase is that Milei is Trump-like in his populist appeal, and he's also a libertarian. Like, that would be a nice way to interpret that phrase. But I think it could happen here. I think the same danger with Trump, the same danger with Milei, the same danger with anyone who would run under a libertarian banner and win here in the United States is sometimes the worst thing that can happen to an ideology or a political movement is that somebody does 3/4 of it really haphazardly. And I think that's the real risk in Argentina right now.
I think that Argentina is a good test case for this kind of stuff, though, too, because the economics are kind of, the structure, the economic structure of that country is so fucked up that they need a radical change. And if they go in the direction that Milei has laid out, which is a big if, because he's got, I was looking this up, his party has 8 of 72 seats in Argentina's Senate, 37 of 257 seats in the House. So he's in an extreme minority position. So there's going to be a lot of coalition building. But, the economics really matter, like where they're getting to a point where, they have their central bank has like no foreign reserves. They are having trouble getting basic goods and things like that. They really need an extreme change. And I was thinking about this in the context, and I can't even remember now if it was 2008 or 2012, when Mitch Daniels wrote a piece in the Wall Street Journal counseling Republicans like, hey, if we don't get the economics right, nothing else matters. So shut the fuck up. I'm paraphrasing there, about stupid culture war stuff, because what really matters is is the federal government destroying the economy through its spending and taxes and regulation. And Argentina is that on steroids. So, this is actually a good test case to see if he will focus on the economics and not get distracted, because I've read both Reason and elsewhere. We've covered this a lot, and it's not fully clear exactly where he stands or his administration will stand on a lot of culture war issues such as abortion or whatever. But it seems like that's not front and center, So I think it's a good test case for this.
Well, Milei has said he does not believe that abortion should be legal. It is now legal, but he has supported some sort of either a reversal of the law that legalized it or a referendum.
Yeah.
You're right that it's not clear whether that's top priority for him, and he is emphasizing an economic
message. He's anti-drug legalization. Yes. He has said. Again, his vice president is very socially conservative and outspoken about this. He says he really doesn't care about people's personal sexual preferences, all of that kind of stuff. So, I think a big question will be, do you stay focused on the main thing in front of you, which is something that American politicians certainly can't do, maybe because it isn't bad enough yet.
Katherine, to put a button on this, my wife this morning observed that this is how the world is going to define the word libertarian for a while. You good with that, Katherine?
I mean, I actually don't think that that's true.
You calling her a liar?
The word libertarian has taken a beating in recent years, for sure. And this will definitely be another data point in a graph that also includes like the current state of the American Libertarian Party and like dudes that people meet on the apps who say they're libertarians, the dating apps or whatever. It seems to be going badly all around. You know, I remain here and always a stalwart against the idea that maybe we can take back the word liberalism and just call ourselves that, but also less of a stalwart than I once was. Yeah, people are gonna definitely be like, lol, remember that dude with the reincarnated dogs? Is that what you want? In the same way that they used to say, lol, Somalia. There's always something.
Or Aleppo.
Yeah.
Or I'd definitely rather have the dogs than Somalia.
No.
I'm a little torn, honestly.
He should have a 3-headed dog. That would be cool.
That's
right?
exactly.
I mean, as long as he's cloning them, just kind of
tweak them a little.
Yeah.
All right,
that can't be that hard.
Let's shift gears before we start referencing people. What was it? Chromium? What did the guy take? The silver colloidal silver guy.
Jones. What was his name? Rick Jones or Ben Jones, something like that.
Davy Jones. All right. Last Thursday in a second federal. See, Davy Jones could be two different people, man. That's why that's clever.
This segment is called the Jones Act.
No,
we don't have
Jones
segment titles.
Yeah, no.
Last Thursday, in a second federal prostitution and money laundering federal trial against executives of Backpage, the now shuttered online advertising company that made a lot of money facilitating sex ads back in the day, Backpage co-founder, longtime Alt Weekly investigative journalist Mike Lacey was found guilty on one count of money laundering, not guilty on a second count, and then the jury hung on 84 other counts, which means his case could go yet to another federal trial. There would be a
third time is the charm, right? Because this was the second trial of this.
You know what that reminds me of, Nick? Let's go ahead and segue here. Is that back when 3 strikes you're out laws were real popular in America, there were countries that didn't have baseball but wanted to do them.
Oh, wow, that's great.
I lived in one of them, and so the slogan was 3 times is enough.
Wow. Yeah.
3 times is enough.
I always wondered with that too. Like, what do you do with the foul ball?
You know what?
Strike.
That's it. That's what we should derail the rest of this podcast
metaphor.
with. So not to make light out of a pretty heavy situation, because 2 of Lacey's co-defendants at Backpage were sentenced between them to dozens of counts of money laundering, and in one of the cases of prostitution. If sentenced and if there is no appeal, they will probably spend the rest of their lives in prison. And there's a couple of other co-defendants who were found not guilty on all charges, and they still described their lives as being ruined. And then, of course, a 6th co-defendant, Lacey's longtime partner Jim Larkin, killed himself at age 74, a week before the trial was scheduled to begin. The verdicts will definitely go to appeal. There were several oddities about the trial and the judge's conduct, most notably barring the defense from even bringing up Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, which exempts website publishers from liability for the actions of their users, which is kind of the whole point of what this thing was about. That bit of that law had previously helped Lacey and company beat the charges and get cases tossed out on the state level. A couple of different cases brought by then California Attorney General and current, I think, Vice President Kamala Harris. Peter, gaze into your murky palantir and tell us what this case does, or at least what it signifies with where we're all at currently legally with Section 230 and kind of the intersection between tech, speech, sex, and politics. Go.
Yeah, it's one big ball of unpleasant mess. Maybe it's a rubber band ball of it's all tied together, and it's all one big thing, and it's hard to separate it out. But I think the way that I look at this case overall is that it is fundamentally about activity that just should be legal. Like all the different things that these guys are charged with maybe one exception. It should all just be legal to begin with, and there should never have been a case brought at all about, are you doing this, and is it legal or illegal, right? Like consensual sex between adults should be legal, regardless of whether money changes hands. Moving your money around between bank accounts should be legal, even if those bank accounts are in another country. Advertising consensual legal services online should be legal, right? And publishers shouldn't be held accountable for illegal activity that is posted about on their websites that they have nothing to do with, that they don't know about, that they are not party to in any kind of direct way, right? And so the only part of this that should be illegal is that there were allegations, there was discussion in some of the write-ups and at times during some of the trials of child sex trafficking. Well, to the extent that anything like that was happening, and it's actually it's very unclear how much, if anything, if any sort of minor activity involving minors was really going on. To the extent that anything like that was happening, if you go back and you look at the internal communications between law enforcement talking to itself, they would tell you that Backpage, the existence of it, that the administrators of it, that the folks running Backpage, they made the job of catching the few people who are actually doing the child sex trafficking, they made that easier because they turned over that material. They were helpful, right? Like they were there to help to assist law enforcement when there was stuff that was clearly illegal and objectionable going on. And so this whole case, this never should have happened. They never should have. It just never should have gone to trial. There never should have been charges. None of this ever should have happened. And it's a real shame, and it's real BS.
The first federal trial was actually tossed out, or declared a mistrial, not tossed out. Difference. That's why they're able to try it again. But because prosecutors kept saying child sex trafficking when that wasn't part of the counts against them. They just wanted to go ooga booga booga and have people lose their minds, which is what happened in general to Backpage over the years. Like when Kamala Harris was first bringing charges, along with Ken Paxton in Texas, Attorney General there, and then later when Kamala Harris got to the Senate and was part of the hearings, along with Claire McCaskill from Missouri, bringing the Backpage people in, they constantly referred it to the internet's largest child online sex brothel, over and over and over again, even though wasn't, or at least not in a way that was chargeable, you would think. But then that caused everyone to lose their minds. Nick, I was struck when doing a video about this on Friday with a late-breaking thought, just comparing their plight to that of Larry Flynt. All right, Larry Flynt, who was one of Reason's 35 Heroes of Freedom back in 2003. Yep. 35th
That's held up.
It's totally held up.
That list has held up very well.
Publisher of Hustler, a smut peddler, a grotesque human being in many, many different ways. Someone who did a lot of really bad things, held up as a hero, as a free speech guy. Let's make a biopic out of him in Hollywood and whatnot. And meanwhile, you have these guys who have more of, at least in terms of Mike Lacey and Jim Larkin, much more of an actual journalistic pedigree, who speaking very clearly throughout the 10 years of this stuff that this is a free speech case. And yet there's going to be no biopic of this. There isn't like editorials.
If there is, it'll be a footnote in a Kamala Harris, Lifetime movie or something.
Or it'll be a book, as came out a couple of years ago by one of the bringers of the federal case against Backpage, like doing a victory lap, and then the Washington Post high fives. What does this tell you about the kind of abandonment of free speech by the institutional, cultural, and journalistic left?
Yeah, it Well, I think it's beyond that. It's just journalism, period, whether it's right wing or left wing, because I don't see a lot of, shout outs to how fucked up all of this is and repressive it is from people to the right of reason either. There is something really wrong and disgusting in kind of professional journalism. And you can't even say it's legacy media anymore. It encompasses that, but something beyond that. Matt, you talk a lot about this, that the anti-authoritarian left has just kind of disappeared. It vaporized sometime, maybe when Barack Obama was elected. We saw this certainly with the anti-war left and its helpmates in journalism. Like, it just kind of disappeared. Sometimes it comes back when it's opportunistic, in order to bash Republicans or something. But on a really fundamental libertarian level, it is deeply shameful that journalists, small and big, left and right, don't care about what was going on in this case. When you have two lifetime journalists who, when was New Times founded? In the early 70s,
1970,
right?
71, around there.
Yeah, I mean, who really, produced an enormous amount of great alternative journalism that helped define what alt weeklies were great for and things like that. When they get put in the dock, and as Peter was saying, this is all like, none of this should have ever happened. They have absolutely nobody backing them in a big way. And it's a real condemnation of the journalistic enterprise and what has happened over the past 10 or 20 years as weirdly legacy media breaks down. Journalism, on the other hand, both becomes more kind of corporate and button down, as well as more wide ranging. And yet, somehow it's people like you in particular and Elizabeth Nolan Brown have been carrying the torch, and a couple of other people like Stephen Lemon, who worked with them. It's a really bad statement on the journalism profession that we writ large don't care about this and are not really at the barricades about this.
Katherine, Reason's been covering this since forever. What's one big takeaway that you have from these verdicts from last week?
I think the real takeaway for me is just the imbalance between the resources of the accused and the government. In this particular case, Lacey and Larkin had many of their assets frozen, or they otherwise were sort of not able to access resources to defend themselves. But even in just a kind of run-of-the-mill legal case, you are up against people who have infinite time and money, if they choose to devote it, to going after you. And in this case, for a variety of reasons that were mostly extrinsic to this case, right? Like, it wasn't really so much about any specific thing that happened on Backpage as it was about the cultural moment and kind of political gain to be had and virtue to be signaled that just led the government often against its own warnings of its own agents, as you mentioned, Matt. Like, there are a bunch of pieces of documentary evidence that were turned up and reported on by Elizabeth Nolan Brown that internally the government was like, I don't know, it seems like these Backpage guys are really trying hard for child sex trafficking not to happen on their platform, and they're cooperating with us. But there was just so much to be gained for the government from saying child sex trafficking over and over and over and going after these guys, and to just like horrible, horrible consequence. I mean, it's going to keep going forever. Like this, it's still not over. It's never going to be over.
I mean, it could conceivably, they could be facing a third trial. They could be facing
a third trial. We don't know. It depends. Again, it depends on kind of who stands to gain on the state side of things. But, I mostly think Peter's take on it is exactly right. But I was struck in addition by the fact that you can always be outspent, outlasted, outgunned by the state, even if your position is strong and defensible and, worth the backing of the people.
The other thing, Matt, that before you, I think we all want to hear what you have to say because you've covered this so much, but I worry that this is the beginning of the end of Section 230. Not as a law per se, but as a defense or, when we talk about cultural moments, we have spent 10 years at least, demonizing all kinds of social media platforms. And it just the insane and stupid and completely uninformed critiques of Section 230 that you see from the right and the left. I mean, this was something where, when Joe Biden and Donald Trump were fighting in 2020 for the presidency, as well as Hillary Clinton and Trump back in 2016, everybody was agreed that Section 230 somehow was horrible and a big disaster, et cetera. And we need to either pump new life into, what exists of Section 230, or kind of figure out a way to write a new law, which I think would be disastrous in the current context. But the idea that the very thing that makes the internet great and wonderful and amazing, which is, this, just massive free speech, where providers are not held responsible for illegal activity, for most illegal activity that is done by people who are adding content to the internet. That is such a boon. And, I worry that's the long-term effect of this, that it's the beginning of the end of that whole glorious era.
And this is something that Liz Nolan Brown was saying from the very, very, very beginning. I mean, when the FOSTA, SESTA moment, the very first moment that politicians figured out that the thinnest end of the wedge against free speech on the internet was people buying and selling sex, maybe extra yucky sex. That thing was the place that all of this started. And now we're age verification, and now we're going to block TikTok, and now we're going to dismantle Section 230. And this was a long time ago. And people didn't want to hear it when it was just oh, so what? A bunch of prostitutes can't get Johns? Who cares? We all should have cared. And we did care, but.
That was 2017 when Senate passed Fight Online Sex Trafficking Act, FOSTA. There's also a SESTA. I can't unravel that one. And Donald Trump signed it into law, and that was definitely pushed pretty heavily by your current Vice President, Kamala Harris, who, along with 46 other attorneys general in 2013, wrote the first of what became kind of an annual letter to the ranking members of Congress saying you have to roll back Section 230 because child online sex trafficking and Backpage. Over and over and over again. That is what they said. And so they've now passed this. This last case wasn't actually tried using that, believe it or not. And then maybe that has something to do with the judge tossing out any reference to Section 230. So you didn't really even have to use FOSTA on that. To Katherine's point about the state has unlimited resources and you don't. The two defendants who were found not guilty on all 51 charges brought against them. Go and read the Courthouse News, which is one of the only places that actually covered this case. Go read their coverage of it and the post-verdict coverage. Quotes from the lawyer of one of them, really remarkable. Just listen, this was a free speech case from the beginning. It should have never been brought. They're channeling Peter Suderman. They're coming after this platform now. They're coming after your platform next. And most importantly, and to Katherine's point, these two people were charged because the government hoped that they would roll over on Mike Lacey and Jim Larkin. That's why. So for 5.5 years, absolutely had their bank accounts drained, basically stained with the accusation of child sex trafficking, even though it wasn't part of the official charges. Imagine all of that. At any given time, you can say, okay, all right, I will plead out as a former CEO had pled out facing similar and probably even worse charges and became the sort of star witness against the Lacey and Company. They could have done that. They didn't. And the lawyer's quotes there should just put a chill down the spine of anyone who really cares about criminal justice in this country. The government has bottomless resources. You don't. And if they decide this is the example they want to make out of you, then example shall be made. And, good on everyone who tried to fight this and are continuing to try to fight this. They could still be declared a mistrial. They made 6 motions for a mistrial in the defense. signed, and one of those is still pending because the prosecution didn't share exculpatory evidence until after final arguments were made. We'll see what happens. There's definitely a lot of grounds to appeal, but in order to just fight the government, you have to absolutely empty whatever bank account that you have if they haven't already frozen it. The deck is so stacked against you. It's disgusting. It's just disgusting.
And Lacey at one point I think he was offered a deal where he could admit guilt to one charge and get like 5 years, So, this goes to that unlimited resource stuff where it's like the charges are so insane that you're like, okay, yeah, I'm in my mid 70s and I'll take a 5-year plea deal. It's sickening, really.
All right. We're going to get to our listener email of the week here in a moment. But first, a reminder that this episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. Friends, Napoleon is reported to have once said, "Never interrupt your enemy when he is making a mistake." But what if the enemy is you? What if you know the right thing to do, or especially to not do, and yet you can't seem to get out of your own way? Like thinking about various anxiety-inducing things before going to bed, or drinking that second beer for breakfast. Therapy can help you figure out what's holding you back and how you can make better decisions going forward. That's where BetterHelp Online Therapy comes in. BetterHelp is an easy-to-use, super flexible, entirely online therapy service that has helped many listeners of this podcast turn the man or woman in the mirror into an ally and not an obstacle. All you have to do is fill out a quick questionnaire, get matched with a therapist, and if you don't like the first one, you can just swap them out for a second. Let therapy help you make better choices with BetterHelp. Just visit betterhelp.com/roundtable right now to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/roundtable. Do it today. You'll be glad you did.
Okay, hey, Matt, reminder to before you move on from this ad, can I just say I was on an Amtrak to New York last week, and there was a lady on my Amtrak train for reals doing a BetterHelp session on the Amtrak. And I just want to say to her, great work. Way to take care of yourself, girl.
She's really getting her life back on track.
Oh my God.
Certainly better than browbeating Chris Coons on the quiet car. Aaron Mate, looking at you, pal. Go ahead and hold everybody accountable, but not in the quiet car, dude. All right. So reminder to please email your short queries to roundtable@reason.com and start cracking your fingers, stretching your knuckles, whatever, in advance of our special bonus webathon, Ask a Libertarian thingy version of this podcast. It'll be coming up here in a week or two. This missive comes from Marty Albini. That sounds like a Cleveland Indians second baseman from the 80s, who writes, Knights of the Round Table. There is a tendency among libertarians to fall for conspiracy theories. No, but I think it has a deeper root than gullibility. When ordered to do something, put on a mask, take a vaccine, pay taxes, there is an instinctive reaction that goes beyond, no, because I don't wanna. It assumes that the reason for the thing being ordered can't be as stated. It must actually serve some nefarious purpose. Don't want to get a shot? The shots don't work. In fact, they must be bad for you. Government tells me I have to wear a mask? Masks must not work. In fact, masks must be bad for you. Well, taxpayer money goes to support Ukraine. Ukraine must be the bad guys. In fact, we should be supporting Russia. Heroin is illegal. Heroin must be good for you. Nick Sarwark, who is the former executive director of the Libertarian National Party, called this instinct reflexive contrarianism. But that doesn't seem to get to the heart of it. Is there a better, punchier, more descriptive term for it? And more importantly, is there a way to counter this tendency and just get back to, no, because I don't wanna, as sufficient unto itself? Katherine?
I don't have a punchier term, but I did think this was a great letter. I think there is genuinely something to sort out between no, I don't wanna, and I don't wanna because I'm right about the underlying thing. And you don't need the second step. The whole thing about libertarianism, the whole thing about pluralism is like, it's enough to just not wanna. Like, we can have a separate conversation about what is and isn't true in this world, but that is not the determinative factor about whether things should be permitted. And separating those ideas, I think, is pretty powerful and pretty important. Because I do think there is, even among libertarians, there is this creeping desire to say, if we do this our way, if we let if we say you don't have to get the shot, you don't have to wear the mask, whatever it is, that like we will be factually vindicated in the thing we didn't want to do. And people make terrible choices all the time. And our whole deal is like, you're allowed to make terrible choices. And that's very, very different than if you just listened to me, I would explain to you the best choices, and they would happen to be different choices in the government. So I think this letter writer has a good point. I agree that I don't think reflexive contrarianism is what's going on. I think it's something a little bit deeper about people want to have an answer to their questions, and they're uncomfortable with the answer. Answers are hard. Let's not make laws about it.
Nick, you're a reflexive contrarian. What do you say?
No, I'm not.
See? Case closed.
He's done?
Yes.
Yeah. But am I supposed to say anything beyond that, Matt?
You were showing your reflexive contrarianism. No, what do you think about what the letter writer said?
I think he's definitely on to something. I don't have a more succinct way of talking about it, but what I find frustrating about libertarians who are prone to conspiracist thinking is that they oftentimes get caught in the trenches when they should be, looking from the commanding heights of a battlefield. So that with something like vaccines, once Trump became kind of anti-vaccine, even as he was, writing Operation Warp Speed, it became part of, okay, well, we're on team anti-vaccine. And then it's like, okay, then it has to become anti-force vaccine, anti-mandate. Then it has to be that the vaccines are no good. Then it's that the vaccines are actually objectively harmful, et cetera. And you get caught in a bunch of kind of small grappling positions, whereas you should be pulling back and always talking about politics and policy, I think, from the perspective of, is this getting us closer or further away from freedom? And I think that is one of the problems with the contemporary Libertarian Party, is that they are kind of grappling in culture war battles much more than kind of bigger principles. And it's always better to be kind of talking about, like, are we moving closer or further away from individual liberty and freedom? I also don't think it's all just reactionary, because the letter writer had me until he went into, heroin is illegal, heroin must be good for you. I know very few people who make that kind of leap. So we're bounded by more than just the reactionary contrarianism.
Morphine is helpful for people who are in pain. Heroin's made of morphine, right?
But I mean, how many people do you know are like, this is, Ron Paul, one of his most memorable moments in a presidential debate was when he said, like when people said, you want to make heroin legal? And he was like, yeah. And, I'm not going to try it the minute that it's legal. Are you? And that was kind of like a pretty good line.
Peter, what do you say to the letter writer's concerns?
Yeah, it's a real tendency in the sort of broader libertarian world, although I think it's also one that is in its own way, it's not great, but there's a healthiness about it, because in fact, even though I am not conspiratorial, I am often frustrated with the conspiracy mongering in the sort of broader libertarian political coalition. I also think that it is valuable to have a small group of people who push back on things kind of as a reflexive contrarians. Like, you need some of that in your discourse. And that doesn't make it right. That doesn't mean that I'm going to sit here and be like, yep, you know what? I think that the vaccines, they're out there killing people. Died suddenly. No, I think that the vaccine's actually basically a net good, possibly with some, small side effects like vaccines sometimes seem to have. But at the same time, you need people who just kind of as a default position say, wait a minute, let's think this through. Let's try to look at the other side of things. And so, again, that doesn't mean they're right. That doesn't mean I endorse what they say. But I do think that the world of the knowledge seeking needs, like, you almost, so in some corporations they have something called red teaming, which is basically people whose job is to look at a plan and see how it's going to fail. That's their whole job, to be the negative Nancys. And the red team is valuable because it gives the team that is making the plan that you're going to use, it gives them some information. And I think, in fact, thinking about contrarianism at its best, definitely not at its worst, but thinking about a kind of reflexively contrarian worldview at its best can serve as a sort of social political red teaming, where somebody's job, whether or not they conceive of it as a job or it's just a disposition, someone's job and someone's business is just to say, wait a minute, this is probably going to fail. Are you sure? Or have you thought this through? This might be wrong. That's a valuable thing to have in the world, even if some of the expressions of it end up unfortunately being wrong or even frankly kind of nutty.
I think sometimes reflexive contrarians, if that's a thing, get to the right answer faster because they're just being reflexive. And the answer is no. And sometimes what the government does, it turns out to be really bad, like masking 2-year-olds by law in New York.
You got to wait
until recently. Wait till at least 3. So there's room for that. I think Peter makes a very salient point when it comes to that. I'm not really interested in coming up with marketing terms to sort of dismiss groups of people politically. I think that's a job better left for Chris Rufo and other people like him. I think that like we always said during the late 1980s, perestroika begins in the home, which is to say, like, the task is among all of us individually to be as good of consumers of information as possible. I don't think that good media consumption or information consumption is had by starting from a point that everyone in a position of authority is always wrong. I think once you start that way, then any number of kind of craziness will tumble forth, and you will look kindly on those who happen to line up with you this week, but are absolutely crazy next week and the week before. That they're
Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
Thank you for getting my reference. So I think it's up to all of us individually to be better consumers of all of that, and places like Reason. Journalists like Jacob Sullum in particular, I would single out for this, who are like trying to work through all of this in real time and helping one sift through the blizzard of information out there in a way that's more helpful than just simply saying, they're all wrong. Even though sometimes when you say, they're all wrong, you're going to be right about the one thing that you're talking about just now. And that's all I have to say about that. All right. I'm going to admit we don't have a whole lot of time for this, but that's fine. I'm going to admit straight from the jump here that I kind of don't know what the next words out of my mouth mean. But
it's okay. ChatGPT doesn't either.
We can use me as a Columbo stand-in here and try to figure out who done it. So as far as I can tell, Friday afternoon news dump situation. Sam Altman, who I think is the director of movies in the 70s, or sounds like it. He's the CEO of the tech company OpenAI, which makes the popular ChatGPT, was out of nowhere fired on the spot by the company's board of directors, as was his fellow co-founder of that company and president, Greg Brockman, I think played first base for the Dodgers. Speculation abounded that the move was made over safety concerns about artificial intelligence, but the board has remained mum about its reasoning. Altman and Brockman, again, not real names, were promptly scooped up by Microsoft. Peter, does anything I just said make any sense to you? And if so, can you explain, as if I'm a stupid person, stretch, why listeners should or should not care about these developments?
So OpenAI made a big splash when they released ChatGPT, which is the most famous of the AI chatbots. It's just what it sounds like, a chatbot. It can talk back to you in a way that seems very right, or respond to you, to your text prompts in a way that seems very lifelike and often quite intelligent. Although it also has the capability, it sometimes hallucinates, right? So you will ask it, for example, about to summarize some sort of set of scientific knowledge, and it will respond by telling you a bunch of true things and also including citations for, sort of references to white papers, academic papers that do not exist. and never have existed. And so that's a thing that happens, right? But it seems to be quite smart and quite interesting. And there are a bunch of people who expect that this type of technology is going to power a lot of like the next several decades worth of innovation and technological development. And it's not just that it's fun to talk to and that it's a chatbot and that you can ask it about classic cocktails and the history of Argentina and politics. It's also that it is a kind of applied general intelligence that in theory could do a bunch of stuff, maybe even all of the kinds of things that human brains do, but faster and better, and maybe in ways that we don't fully understand. And so, for example, I think one of the big things that this is already being applied to and will be, and we will see a lot of AI technology involved in over the next couple of decades, is biotech. And it seems very clear that AI is going to help us create new drugs and think about how to make people healthier and live longer. And it's going to come up with stuff that humans wouldn't necessarily come up with on their own without AI, because what is it? It is intelligence, which fundamentally is just pattern recognition, right? It's better at recognizing patterns faster than we are. So that's OpenAI. It's a big deal company. It might be the future of everything, or at least the start of the future of everything. And the guy who's been running it is Sam Altman. And on Friday afternoon, he just lost his job. And you know what? We don't really know why. The board has said, well, it was because he wasn't communicating clearly with the board. And there has been some suggestion, as you said, Matt, that there were concerns about safety. And so when I say safety here, we got to talk about there's a whole bunch of people in the AI theorist world who think that, well, maybe AI will help us design drugs that let people live to 200 years old, or maybe it will take over everything and kill all humans, and it'll be much smarter than us and we won't be able to stop it. So it seems like maybe the AI is going to could kill all humans. People were just worried about Sam Altman deploying a bunch of this stuff. But it's also totally not clear because there are now some statements out from, for example, the interim CEO who has been appointed of OpenAI, who's like, actually, the board and I are all pretty aligned on safety, and that's not really what the issues were here. So we don't know what's going on. But there is at least some sort of suggestion in the reporting that has come out over the last few days that the safety concerns were real. And I do think this tells you, among other things, what the people involved view as the stakes. They think that this is the most important thing in the world, and they also think that maybe, just maybe, all of human existence is kind of at stake here.
Nick, you make Pokemon.
I want to point out that was the kind of equivalent of a Ginger Baker drum solo where the rest of the band went out and had a 3-course meal and then came back.
Sometimes, you need a little break psychically. Okay. You make Pokemon presidential candidates out of AI for
using
fun.
DALL-E.
Is there some more lightning roundish? Is there more punk drumming?
Two quick things. I think the overblown safety concerns that ChatGPT and or DALL-E or AI is going to kill us all or turn us all into paper clips or slaves. Yeah, those fears are unbelievably overstated and insane. And I hope they're retreating as people actually become more fluent in using things like ChatGPT and other forms of generative AI. And then the other thing I just want to say is the interim CEO, Emmett Shear, who co-founded Twitch, the streaming service, who left there a year ago because of various concerns about content moderation and things like that. I met him when I was out in LA during the pandemic, and he was a big Reason reader when he was in high school. So,
boom.
There you go. I don't know. Yeah, boom goes the dynamite, Matt Welch.
Katherine, has your AI doppelganger on the Best of Reason podcast turned you into paperclip yet?
I'm hoping, honestly. That sounds great. I'm ready for my ascendance to the paperclip state.
In the AI world, are we going to need paper?
I mean, I don't know. I feel like now that Sam Altman is with Microsoft, actually, we're all going to become clippy. Oh. That's the real AI paperclip convergence. No, I want to. It's a threat. I want to note the last tweet on Emmett Shear's Twitter account before the tweet where he's like, yo, somebody called me today and offered me the job of being the CEO of OpenAI, which is it's one of those great political compass charts, with the 4 quadrants. And it offers the 2 spectrums. AI is basically the internet, or AI is a million times more powerful than the internet, or maybe AGI, whatever, what they're doing over at OpenAI. And then the other spectrum is that means slow down or that means go fast. And then on the quadrants are techno-optimist, safetyist, doomer, and build the machine god. Those are the possible stances you can take at this point.
I'm sitting across from the machine god right now.
Oh, yeah. And I think that's a really interesting thing that's happening within OpenAI, but also just in this conversation is like, it is not just keep going or slow down. It's also, what is this? What does it mean? Like Nick's answer just now was anchored on, this is not a thing that is so fundamentally different in type that the rules no longer apply. And I tend to be in that camp as well. And it will be interesting to see what happens with these major players in this space.
All right, let's go to our end of podcast, what we have all been consuming on a cultural level. Nick, why don't you start us off?
Yeah, I watched the Netflix biopic Rustin, which is Bayard Rustin, who was a black gay conscientious objector during World War II, who I think I might have talked about in this context earlier, and if not, I have a long interview with Dan Axt, who wrote a book called War by Other Means, which is a study of Rustin and a couple of other CEOs. Rustin, during World War II, refused to even sign the papers or file the papers with the government that would have kept him out of prison during World War II for refusing to be drafted because he didn't think the state had the claim on him and his body. And then he went on, most famously to really be one of the engineers and architects of the civil rights movement, particularly the March on Washington, where he was kind of pulled back a bit from the public stage because he was homosexual, had been a communist, etc. He's a fascinating character, and the Netflix movie is pretty good. I hope mostly that it spurs people to, start Googling Rustin and see what he has to do with. He's also a hero of Coleman Hughes, who's another podcaster and author who I interviewed recently, who talks about why Rustin matters. And Bayard Rustin is one of those guys who has had a massive influence on the past, 70 years that we probably don't talk about enough. There's a lot there that is just absolutely fascinating. And even putting aside his totally socialistic economics, is fundamentally libertarian when it comes to the relationship of the individual to the state. So Rustin on Netflix, it's worth checking out, and then read what you can about Bayard Rustin.
Awesome. Peter, what did you consume?
I went to the bar Double Chicken Please, which was this year ranked the best bar in North America and the second best bar on the planet by the organization that does these big bar rankings. So Double Chicken Please is a newfangled, super innovative cocktail bar whose main claim to fame, beyond just sort of being a beautiful space on the Lower East Side, is that in their back room, which is where I went, most of their cocktails, I should say, are designed to replicate comfort food items. So, for example, one of the cocktails I had was called Cold Pizza, and it included tequila, Parmesan cheese, burnt toast, tomato, basil, honey, and egg white, and yet it was delicious. Even better than that was the red eye gravy with Irish whiskey, coffee butter, corn walnut, wild mushroomed, and microwaved coppa. And you have no idea how delicious these things are until you try them. They sound strange. They sound like, what the hell is that? What is going on? And yet you try them and you're just like, oh, it's like your brain is just like, does like a little crazy dance in your head. It is like that moment in Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory where the kid has the little tiny candy that's supposed to be like a whole meal, right? And she can just taste all of it going through. And it's just like that, except that it is a cocktail. And it's a wonderful place. just a wonderful vibe in it, but it's a place that tells in some ways the story of innovation in a way that we don't think about it. This started as a food truck in 2017, and then the physical location actually was built out during the pandemic. And so in a lot of ways, this is a pandemic success story in which somebody used the pandemic and the pause of the pandemic as a kind of reset point to start something new in their life and build something that quickly became recognized as one of the great places in the world. And this concept of building cocktails that taste like food and that taste like that use flavor sets that you would always recognize already and that are familiar to you. This concept has taken over a bunch of kind of high-end cocktail making just in the last couple of years, and it just really shows the kind of restless and fascinating innovation that you see in the culinary space right now. If you can possibly get in, it is quite difficult to get a reservation. I strongly recommend it. That's Double Chicken, please, Lower East Side of Manhattan.
And my reflexive contrarian says no to all of that. Katherine, what do you consume?
There was a rocket launch. SpaceX Starship. It was their second test flight. And as is often the case with stuff that Elon Musk is involved in, it exploded, but maybe on purpose, ? Also often the case with stuff Elon is involved in. The term that SpaceX prefers is rapid unscheduled disassembly. That occurred over the water on purpose because they lost contact with the rocket. But it was a successful launch up to that point. Information was gathered. They figured out a cool new thing with like water on the launch pad to keep that thing from blowing up. This is a really, really big rocket. This could be ultimately the vehicle or a similar vehicle that would get people to Mars. So that's pretty exciting. And, always fun to see a giant explosion.
Would this go all the way to Mars, or would it explode? Or would it sort of take off? I guess it would explode. Would it take off and then the rocket kind of drops back to Earth situation?
Yeah. So there's, the model of SpaceX, of course, is to have as many reusable components as possible. And their Falcon series is the sort of old reliables at this point. And I do want to pause and be like, wow, there's a private rocket company that makes something that we can use the word reliable in association with. That's pretty cool. There have been like 230, 240 launches with those. But this is the next generation thing. Similarly, different parts come back to Earth and get reused.
Sounds like straight fire to me.
I watched.
Is it like a Wile E. Coyote thing though, where the rocket lands on Earth and squashes Elon Musk on the way down?
I actually think
something?
the rocket would have made it to Mars if it hadn't looked down.
Yeah, makes sense.
Speaking of 1960s cartoon characters, I watched a documentary about Yogi Berra. A great Italian-American, a longtime New York Yankees catcher, and yes, model for the Yogi Bear cartoon. As a documentary called It Ain't Over, which is a reference to one of many yogi-isms that has permeated the culture. Charming, weird things that he said. It ain't over till it's over. It's deja vu all over again. If you see a fork in the road, take it. Nick will remember 17 off the top of his head, I am sure, upon request. It's one of those documentaries came out last year. I got on the streaming services of May of this year. It's by Sean Mullen, written and directed. It's one of those documentaries, as we've talked about many times in the past, that had the family kind of involvement and blessing. And so with a lot of like granddaughters complaining that people didn't realize what a great player he was because he became this sort of cartoon character, literally, and a sort of a beloved pitchman of Yoo-Hoo soda. Nick, I hadn't seen any of those Yoo-Hoo commercials, and I was very...
I grew up with those.
They're fantastic. They didn't allow them on the West Coast for obvious reasons. But anyways, it starts off with like, that sort of sense of it's going to be special pleading from the family, but it ends up being a very... sort of great and stirring little story about Italian-American, heritage and assimilation. Lorenzo Pietro Berra Nick Gillespie. Served in D-Day, volunteered for World War II at age 18 after already signing his first professional baseball contract. Didn't have to do that, just did it. Went on D-Day, got injured, didn't report his injury because he didn't want to freak out his mom. I think got shot in his hand or had something bad happen with his hand. Strange, odd little short, squat dude who looked funny and had big ears, and was a 3-time most valuable player and won 10 World Series rings as a player, and then also was a great manager and coach, including for the New York Mets back in Nick's youth. Has all kinds of people in it: Bob Costas, Vin Scully, Roger Angel, Joe Garagiola, his childhood friend, Joe Madden, et cetera, Billy Crystal. And it hooks you in. It's great. It's a Nick Gillespie special. I think he must.
Do they substantiate the idea that anybody thinks he was anything other than like one of the, 2 best players at the catcher position?
They are the opening gambit is that before he died in 2015, at the age of 90, he was sitting with his granddaughter and they were watching a special before the All-Star game or something. And they're like, these are the 4 greatest living baseball players. And out trots, I forget who exactly, but one of them was definitely Johnny Bench, catcher for the Cincinnati Reds. And they were like, my God, how could they possibly say that Johnny Bench was better than Yogi Berra? That's a coin toss, I think. But I think it is true to say that this very, lovable, cuddly cartoon character who is perennially underestimated, we've just sort of like forgotten what an actual good player he was, which I think also can be applied to people like Jackie Robinson because he was so important. In other ways, people kind of lost the sense of his playing. So the film rehabilitates him as a player and also as a thinker and a coach and as a man and a father of serious cokeheads.
And Matt, I realize that now we are participating in a bass solo by Jack Bruce
Absolutely.
During Toad or something, and the other 2 people have gone out to lunch and driven around the block a couple times.
I hope it's a slap bass solo.
How is Dale Berra treated in this? Is that part of the American immigrant story that you too can grow up to have a son who follows you into baseball and then disgraces the family?
Becomes a terrible cokehead. Yeah, they go straight into it and they tell the story, and I'm sure it's 100% true, that after he had been caught out being just a rapacious cokehead, a baseball player, Yogi says, look, this ends today. And, I'm going to disown you. Your mom's going to disown you. Everyone's going to disown you unless you stop today. And lo and behold, he stopped that day. Thanks to Yogi's intervention. So I hope it happened like that. He seemed like he's pretty well adjusted now. And that's a nice story. But anyways, It Ain't Over, it's called. And I recommend it. It's nice. All right. That's all the recommendations we have time for here on the Reason Roundtable podcast. Again, Webathon coming up soon. Ask a Libertarian. This is the time. Throw all of the questions at us, please, at roundtable@reason.com. We have lots of other podcasts now these days at reason.com/podcasts. We also have a pretty regular events, particularly in Nuevo Yorko. Nick, do you have any you'd like to advertise?
On November 27th. It's a Monday, 2 weeks from now, I guess, or a week from now. I don't even. Yeah, thank you. We are doing a great Bitcoin Bathhouses and the Future of Energy event in New York. Go to reason.com/events. It's $10. We're going to show a documentary about Bitcoin and energy use that's produced by Zach Weissmuller, and then we're going to have a great panel afterwards and an after party at PubKey. But go to reason.com/events.
You had me at after party. You can always support our work by going to reason.com/donate. Okay, thank you. We'll see you next week. Have a happy Thanksgiving in the meantime. Goodbye.